Hello? Hello? Mic check. Yeah. Um, for for colleagues at the back, try take your seats in front so that when others are coming in, they're able to occupy the space from the back. I think it's easier that way.
Say check. Check.
Good afternoon, colleagues. For those of us that are still outside and are planning to join us, please join us, and we are about to start. I want to thank everybody who's been able to join us in the room so far, and I want to recognize the participants that are joining us from the hybrid platform. So this is the Oxfam and Partners event that is dubbed Measuring for Gender Response and looking at the roadmap towards a gender transformative agricultural framework in Africa. So because we are short of time, we will go straight to the opening remarks. And I will invite my colleague, Charles Opio from the Oxfam in Uganda country office to start us off. Welcome, Charles.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Have you had lunch? Yeah, because this is an agriculture-related event, so the right to food is really essential. So as they said, my name is Charles Opio. I work with Oxfam in Uganda, and my role at the country office here is to manage a unit which is focusing on resilient livelihoods. And I'm here to really represent the country director, who unfortunately is not able to be with us here. But he has really sent his regards. And I want to say that the entire Oxfam staff in Uganda, but also the entire Confederation, is so much eager, and they're really following this discussion because of the love and because of the urgency, the importance that this particular function really have. So I want to start by really, first of all, wishing you a happy new year. I think we are just 9 days into the new year. And I think it's just good to really wish us a good start. And that's why I think this particular event is like a New Year gift to all of us. Yeah. I also want to, in addition, convey the greetings from my colleagues. They really were wishing me really well. They said, please go and represent us. And we have some few issues that we think you can actually discuss. And I told them not to worry because we have a side session that is going to specifically talk about some of the issues that they are concerned about. Yeah. So my role for this particular side session is to really open it. But I think before I open it up, I want to acknowledge a few things. That when you look at the agricultural sector across the continent, that is Africa, in the different countries, the contexts are really similar. The contexts are similar, and I want to particularly point out that one of the key players or the key group of people who are really contributing to feeding us on a daily basis are the women. The women are the ones really, if you look at the statistics in different countries, you find that more than 75% of them are the one engaged in agriculture or in food production. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, they're doing it at a small scale. So we normally call them small-scale food producers. And despite their immense contribution towards feeding us, towards nourishing us, they face a number of challenges. And these challenges are really impeding their contribution or slowing their contribution towards feeding us. And some of these challenges really range from limited access to productive resources like land, access to quality seeds. They also sometimes face a lot of challenges in accessing platforms where key decisions that are discussed and made and yet concern what they do, they really lack access to such platforms. If you look at also the market, because in Uganda, we are saying we need to transform the agricultural sector to be commercial. We're talking about agro-industrialization. But these people lack access to credit, they lack access to high-end market and related information that will make them to really leverage on some of these markets. And yet, if you see the increasing trend or the changing demand for the different food that is being produced, you find that the food that is produced by the women are really considered safe because they are organically produced, they are agroecologically produced, but they have problem in getting resources or getting support that can make their production go really at scale. So we want to. I hope that this particular side session will really point out to the event. I mean, to the organizers, to the different governments and heads of states, what to really consider, because it's one thing to make commitments, but we want this commitment to really be very key, to be very discreet in actually seeing, getting the necessary information, disaggregating them, and really giving meaning on how they are really affecting women, on how women are contributing, so that priorities that will be discussed are really are discussed in favor of those kind of challenges or advancing opportunities that are really before the smallholder food producers. So I want to urge the side session here to really suggest practical solutions, practical options, so that the different, let me say, the CAADP organizers really find it easy to adopt, because they're really trying to look for information or ideas from different stakeholders. And that's why I think these side sessions are being organized. So I want to ask you to really be as practical as possible, give examples so that it's easier to justify, and then our voices can be heard, and then in future into the plan until the next maybe session is again included. I think this side session is so much aligned to the strategic objective 4 of this particular CAADP strategy and action plan, which is talking about, let me just make reference to that, advancing inclusivity and equitable livelihoods. So I think if some of you have already had access to this particular document, you will see how they have really elaborated this. But I think this particular session should really be very practical, as I said, to really put more flesh onto the strategy and actions. So I don't want to take a lot of time. I want to leave most of the time for the discussions. And unfortunately, I won't be here for the entire session. I have another side session where I'm going to be one of the panelists. So with these few remarks, I really want to wish you really a very fruitful deliberation and feel really at home. This is our country, Africa. So just to welcome you on behalf of Oxfam in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Can we get just a round of applause for Oxfam in Uganda? Yeah, because we wouldn't have been able to move forward if they didn't let us, their colleagues in the Africa platform, move forward. So thank you so much. So I want you to turn to your neighbor first, right? We're about to go to church and it's going to be a bit corny. So turn to your neighbor and ask them, how do you say welcome home in your language? And I will ask a few of you to let us know what has been discussed. So two things, really quickly. Colleagues, Nanzala, really quickly, where are they from? How do they say welcome home? Really quickly. All right. Teresa looks ready. She will tell us where her partner is from and how they say welcome home. Okay, thank you. So I will also want to hear from this lovely lady in the third row. And you can tell us what your name is. Karibu sana. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's always good to break the ice so that we all feel like we're on the same page, right? And we don't move forward as strangers. So I want to go to the first session of this event, and I want to give us some background. I know we all understand how CAADP works, but I want to give us some background as to why we are here. As you all may know, since 2003, the CAADP framework has been the guiding framework for the continent's vision in agriculture, and it aims to ensure agricultural growth rate above 6% in the agricultural sector to advance food security in the long run. So it has 4 pillars that CAADP focuses on, and one is extending the area under sustainable land management and reliable water control systems. It also looks to improve rural infrastructure and trade-related capacities for market access. It also focuses on food supply, reducing hunger, and improving responses to food emergencies. And lastly, it looks to improve agricultural research, technology, dissemination, and adoption. I think you will all agree with me in terms of the role that small-scale women farmers and agripreneurs play in agri-value chains in Africa. And so one of the areas that we are looking to look at today is how do we develop, not just develop a framework that particularly addresses the needs of this particular demographic, but ask ourselves the very critical question of how do we then measure if that framework is effective. Now, to do that, Oxfam and our partners have moved forward to carry out an analysis that looks at the performance of CAADP from a gender lens, and that is what we'll be hearing about today. And these partners, for clarity, some of who are in the room, I'd like to recognize, that is the African Food Systems Parliamentary Network, Action Aid International, SDG2 Advocacy Hub, the African Women's Development and Communication Network, also known as FEMNET in absentia, and of course the African Union CAADP. So I would like to invite the consultant, Simeon Ogonda, who is a specialist in M&D gender, and who has worked with the team to carry out this analysis so that we can hear broadly how has CAADP performed, and then this sets the pace for the rest of our discussion. Welcome, Simeon.
Good afternoon. Yes, my name is Simeon, and for the next 10 minutes, I'll be taking us through the research we conducted, which is aimed at checking at the gender performance of the CAADP framework. And in particular, I'll be paying critical attention to the strategic commitment required. And in case there are questions, I could handle them at the end if the 10 minutes are not completely used up. So to begin with, it's important to understand that The Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program is a key initiative of the African Union aimed at boosting agricultural productivity and fostering economic growth across the continent. This has been happening for the last 20 years when the framework was developed. However, despite its objectives, significant gaps remain in addressing gender equity within its framework, particularly concerning the area of rights, economic empowerment, and climate justice. And this is particularly so because smallholder farmers, majority of whom are women, are particularly affected when these gaps are allowed to persist. And the importance of gender equity in this dialogue is that in order to achieve gender equity in agriculture, it is crucial that we enhance sustainable development by ensuring that marginalized groups get particularly extra attention in handling issues that affect them at a very personal level. And the urgency of this action is that a gender-responsive framework would be essential in enhancing what we call the accountability and outcomes within the CAADP framework. And this would ensure that women's rights and contributions are fairly and effectively recognized and supported. This is not just for the purpose of empowering women, but for ensuring that the overall continent's production is improved, as currently Africa has 65% of the remaining arable land, and much of this is not well utilized. In order to undertake this analysis, we looked at about 7 continental frameworks and blueprints that have been guiding the agricultural inclusion process, at least for the last 20 years. The first document that we looked at is, of course, the CAADP 3 framework draft itself, a document that promotes and enhances agricultural productivity while integrating gender considerations. However, because the document itself is the subject of was the subject of our research, the other 6 blueprints sort of gave us a guideline on how well CAADP has performed so far. It is important to note at this juncture that by 2015, the Africa Union Agenda 2063, through Goal 5, had already set a clear standard that by 2063, gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls should be completely achieved. However, we have covered 10 years since that declaration was made through Goal 5. And so far, it seems we have a long way to go, as I'm going to demonstrate throughout this presentation. The other document we looked at is the AU strategy for gender equality and women's empowerment. And this document is important because it focuses on implementing gender-sensitive initiatives across all sectors, including agriculture. So it's not just focused on agriculture, but it does give us a very good pointer. The Malabo Declaration of 2014 also does provide us with guidance because it commits to inclusive growth and accountability, especially in advocating for women's access to land, credit, and agricultural information. Much of this access is greatly needed in rural areas, but it is lacking in much affected by the infrastructure that is available in rural Africa today. The Maputo Protocol of 2005 also prioritizes food security and empowers women in agricultural policy making. That declaration, that protocol, almost 2 decades back, compared to the reality of now, still presents us with a lot of ground to cover. And as a guiding document, we are going to compare the CAADP with a document like the Maputo Protocol to see how far down the line we've traveled. The Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality is another document we looked at, and its aim is to promote gender equality across all societal facets because it insists on good governance and accountability. And part of accountability involves including all members of the African society to that development process. Finally, we looked at the UN Women Generation Equality Forum agenda, which also addresses contemporary issues such as empowering women and agricultural development. The rationale for these documents is that they do provide us with a comprehensive commitment on gender equality that we need to take into consideration as we assess CAADP 3. Now, the document itself, CAADP document we analyzed, we demonstrated through that research that there are 4 particularly lacking areas. And these key limitations tend to challenge the effectiveness of how the framework is to help, especially in the next 10 years. And this included the lack of gender disaggregated data, ineffective engagement in policy formulation, the barriers to financial access, and cultural constraints. Our analysis established that there's insufficient collection of data that is specific to gender metric, and it hinders understanding of women's contributions, as well as unique challenges. This further makes it difficult, especially because CAADP is implemented at the national level, makes it difficult to understand the issues that are particular to women as smallholder farmers. Furthermore, the ineffective engagement in policy formulation. Our analysis of both the Maputo Protocol and the Malabo Declaration demonstrate that women are often excluded from decision-making processes. And this declaration and protocol specifically encourage the inclusion as a critical factor that is supposed to promote the development process in agriculture by ensuring that policies formulated account for the unique experiences of women smallholder farmers, especially, and decision-making in agricultural planning at the national down to the local level. Thirdly, the barriers to financial access. This has been mentioned previously in this particular session, and our analysis established that there are systemic biases in lending. And these systemic biases are defined by our next point of cultural constraints, but as a factor in financial access, it is understandable that when producers are considered high risk, traditional lending institutions would not easily give them loans. And women particularly face this type of stigma because they have limited access to land and other sources of capital that would make them good working partners with the banks, for example, as well as microfinances. And in most cases, smallholder producers, mostly women, tend to fall into predatory lending practices that further challenge or negatively affect their capacity to be agriculturally productive. Now, cultural constraints, and this is a challenge especially because the traditional gender roles and cultural norms often exclude women from participating fully in agriculture, and that's according to the Malabo Declaration. Now, further analysis of other academic research that informed this particular presentation is that you find that most smallholder women farmers are excluded at critical points in the production value chain. It's at planting, weeding, and harvesting that you find so many cultural practices associated with handling crop from the farm. And once you exclude a very integral part of the population from that process, you're left with an outcome that greatly favors men so to say. And once that happens, every cycle of production is limited to how well women can align to the cultural realities they face. So in light of those limitations, we came up with certain strategic commitments that we believe are required in order to overcome the challenges that we have already discussed. And one is that we, of course, need deliberated engagement on women's rights in the policy discourse. Creating policies that support smallholder women farmers isn't enough, because sometimes these policies are created with the understanding of the financial system as it is. There needs to be a more proactive engagement that would then guarantee that women's voices are heard, included, accommodated, and not just integrated, but inclusion is also completely guaranteed. The other strategic commitment is a rigorous and measurable capacity building framework aimed specifically at gender-sensitive programming on building the capacity of women as leaders. We also need participatory action in gender-responsive agricultural governance. Participatory action requires that decisions are made through careful and collective discussions on issues that affect women as a unique issues that affect women, not just the entire society. We also have the need for an application of a human-centric approach to developing culturally sensitive gender responses in agri-value chains. This is a bit more complicated, and I believe we'll probably have access to the report later on. And the other one is the application of gender-responsive budgeting, especially to cover the challenges associated with the traditional lending practices of financial institutions, from banks up to the micro-lending institutions. And then we need to adopt an Afro-feminist research solutions for a gender transformative agricultural framework. We have to look at the problem as a much bigger macroeconomic level planning, because if we don't, then we'll keep on providing small solutions to a festering issue. There are 5 reasons why we believe those recommendations are significant, and these include enhancing data collection. The solutions that we have here, if these commitments are made, then we'll be able to enhance data collection, promote inclusive policy formulation, develop a gender-responsive financial product development and management systems at the country level, address cultural dynamics that keep women on the lower side of the value chain, yet they're the main producers, especially at the local level. And then finally, if these solutions are developed, we will be able to support women's leadership development. These 5 reasons can be supported by all the documents we looked at, the continental blueprints I have discussed. But the most important element we need to put into practice is the fact that we have an Agenda 2063 that is a very strong guiding principle. And then we also have the fact that 65% of this continent's arable land, 65 of the world's arable land, 65% of the remaining world's arable land is in this continent, and it needs to be utilized effectively. If we improve the political profile of agriculture, then we'll stop looking at it in terms of piecemeal performances on the CAADP and instead invest in these strategic commitments as a way of introducing a more comprehensive outcome by 2035. Thank you.
Thank you, Simeon. That was very comprehensive. Can he get another round of applause? I'm just going to make sure that we are still on the same page and keep our minds jogging. So I'm going to pick on a couple of people just to hear what stood out from the presentation. Yeah, I can see some of you starting to leave now that I'm saying that, but just stick in your seat. If it gets hot, just tell us how you're feeling, how your day is going, and what you plan to have for dinner, yeah? So let me pick on a couple of people. I see Jack Odiwa on this side, who is the chairman of the Kenya National Gender Sector Working Group. If I can quickly hear what stood out to you.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and Happy New Year, everyone. I think one of the hindrances that came out from the presentation was lack of that financial access. So how do we have the financial products targeting women in the whole conversation? Yeah, really stood out for me. Thanks.
Okay. Can I also hear from Francis Aguilera on this side?
Yeah, thanks. I think essentially the interest and what stood out really for me is the focus on the investments. And if you follow the story of CAADP, one of the key features was about how we're able to put in enough resources, right, into the food system. And that has been a real challenge. And so for us to be able to begin to look closely at some of these issues, I think that is a perfect entry point to what the future should look like. And so, yeah, the investments in the sector and how it is targeting, inequalities, how it is targeting gender and so on and so forth. That is a mark that stood out for me.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you. So I want to move on to the next segment of discussion. And I want to pick it up from where Simeon has left it, which is the adoption of Afrofeminist solutions. I will not discuss research solutions, but I will discuss approaches as a whole with the panelists that will be joining me here. And I want to introduce them and ask them to join me on stage as we start off. So I will ask Constance Okeka, who is the International Project Manager for Scaling Up of Public Investment in Agriculture, and who is with Action Aid, to join me. You can clap for Constance. Thank you. I also want to ask Honorable Jeremy Lisuba, who is a Member of Parliament in Congo-Brazzaville and also the Secretary General of the African Food Systems Parliamentary Network, to join me on stage as well. Thank you, sir. And then I will ask Mrs. Mary Afan, who is the past president of the Small Scale Women Food Producers in Nigeria, SWOFON, to join us, and also a member of AKIWOF in the ECOWAS region. Thank you, ma'am. Before we start off, I just want to lay the groundwork in terms of what this particular discussion is supposed to achieve. So this session is supposed to help us understand basically what Afrocentrism is, why Afrocentrism is important in the context of gender in agriculture, and where do we stand in that regard in current day as a continent. Are we in fact adopting an Afrocentric lens when it comes to gender response in the agricultural framework? And that is at the continental level. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Okay. All right. So in terms of understanding, I know this word Afrocentrism is something that is a concept that is fairly new to most policymakers in the room. So I want to start off by explaining what Afrocentrism is. So Afrocentrism is basically the adoption of a human-centric lens in terms of policy that is centered on the values, the philosophies, and the principles of the African people. And it is important to adopt Afrocentrism That is by making sure that communities are co-designers in policy, that they help to measure and evaluate the efficacy of policy, and that we also understand the role that ecosystems and institutions around these communities play in making sure that policy is effective. To do that, or rather what the outcome of that would be, is to ensure that we have a sustainable policy formulation and review approach, and that essentially when it comes to agriculture, we are protecting the investment by making sure that we keep our focus on small-scale women farmers and agripreneurs who are the target demographic for majority of the interventions. I want to start off by speaking to Constance about what the role of non-state actors is in ensuring that, for instance, we have collective governance in the CAADP framework, and more so in ensuring that the diversified and expanded needs of small-scale women farmers are always recognized. So what is the role of non-state actors in actualizing that?
Thank you, Angie. Hope everyone can hear me. Thank you for this opportunity. Basically, the CAADP, if we all will recollect, has one of its guiding principle, is principle of inclusivity, participation, and the non-state actors who are made up of smallholder farmers, civil society organization. Okay, smallholder farmers, civil society organizations, youth group, media, and the rest of them play a major role in ensuring that whatever policy designs or programs that are brought up by government is actually, all inclusive and it's actually better implemented. And as non-state actors, we have been able to put ourselves together to be ready for this job. I mean, it's not like one of the farmers was telling me this morning. Do you realize that this your CAADP that we're talking about is in the third term? In school you do first term, second term. So this is the third term. And when you do the first term and you have a week pass, you try to make sure that the next term you do well. But if you perchance fail in the third term, it's a repeat class and it might be chucked out of school. And I was really laughing and I'm saying, okay, if you take a chronicle of what the non-state actors have done, maybe in the first term we were not sure where we were in the whole framework. But by the second term, we had realized our role as non-state actors. We knew that we needed to play our role so that everybody, especially the smallholders, the marginalized groups, are carried along in the implementation of the framework. And what have we done? We put ourselves together as a platform known as the CAADP Non-State Actors Group, mobilizing, organizing smallholder farmers from the communities, from the countries, from the regional economic communities, bringing them to a continental platform where their voices are actually captured, where their capacities are built, where they are able to interface with policymakers to be able to share their needs, because they are the face of the CAADP, they are the beneficiaries of the CAADP, they are the people that, like everybody said, they are the food producers. They play a major role, they have a major stake in the framework of things. So any program or framework that is designed that do not accede to their needs is like a waste of time. So yes, we play a role because one, we would help in amplifying their voices, build their capacities, also provide opportunity to interface with policymakers, because if you don't bring up the supply side or the demand side and bring up the supply side to be balanced, then there will be a problem. So as non-state actors, we provide that platform. So for example, at this event, we've been able to facilitate support to bring in farmers. You see Mary here, you see a lot of women farmers here, sitting down here, being at the forefront, making sure that the issues that are being discussed is capturing their needs. We don't just only do the participation in meetings. We also use their structures, ensure that they have leadership structures down to the grassroots level. Any woman farmer you see sitting down here belongs to a cooperative of 10, 15 women living in the community. So all you just see across the Canada is just the structures of leadership, so that you are sure that whatever you're hearing from Madam Mary, she's speaking for over 2 million women farmers belonging to small-scale women farmers of Organization of Nigeria, and also representing the African Kilimanjaro Women Farmers Forum from ECOWAS. So it's not only speaking about herself. And this can only be possible because they are part of the CAADP Non-State Actors Group. We also build capacity. How do we encourage and make sure that they understand these processes? Yes, we brought them here. some of these things are technical. How do we ensure that they participate? We do preparation meetings. We break down some of the frameworks, some of the technical documents, so that they understand it and relate it to their lived experiences, so they're able to ask questions. So that when they meet parliamentarians like Honorable Lisuba, they're able to talk to him in the language he will understand. They meet their ministers here, they're able to speak. They meet other technical people, they're able to speak. So we bridge that gap. Then we also provide linkages and opportunities because within the CAADP framework, there are a lot of opportunities that need to be tapped for smallholder women farmers. How are they linked up to market? How are they linked up to all the value chain within the agricultural sector? How are they supposed to get funding? You understand? How are they supposed to bring out their issues in such a way that people can look at it and see how to help them? So that's the kind of role we play as non-state actors. And finally, maybe because of time, we also make sure that we build solidarity with them, because we feel that for the CAADP to succeed and to be called a success, it must have made a positive impact on the life of women farmers in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. Before you put down your mic, there's something that you bring up that is very important, which is the ability of constituents, especially at the rural level, to be able to participate in continental policy. One of the areas that has been particularly challenging is in terms of keeping governments accountable in their performance when it comes to CAADP. One of the mechanisms that the African Union uses is the scorecard approach, which is basically the mechanism that houses metrics that countries aim to achieve when it comes to CAADP. Now, there is a breakdown in terms of the ability of target demographics on the ground, let me say that loosely, to be able to hold governments accountable or even support them because they don't understand the scorecard approach. What opportunities exist there for non-state actors to support this to be more efficient within this new framework?
Okay, when you talk about scorecards and opportunities, I don't see it as opportunities. I see it as something we're already doing. And because, the scorecard approach that is used by the CAADP framework is quite appreciative, because it also makes member states, review themselves, peer review themselves, and also score themselves. But at the same time, it gives a kind of power to the people, because people are able to ask questions. Like, for example, you would hear, oh, a country is on track, and when you go to the field to titrate some of those information, the masses are saying, how are they on track when we are not benefiting anything? You understand? So as non-state actors, I talked about simplification and translation of some of these technical documents. We look at the scorecards. We use these scorecards to, first of all, titrate to be sure, okay, like non-state actors, ActionAid and other groups like Oxfam, CARE, and the rest of them came together, worked with women farmers across Africa, and developed what you call the CAADP VAP kit, Value Addition Kit. The idea is to use that kit. It's a simplified way, localized way of asking questions. Okay, if this is an indicator of the CAADP, how does it apply to you as smallholder farmers? Then they titrate, they say, okay, these benefits, or this is where the challenges are, these are where the gaps are. And based on that, they're able to use that to query some of the results we see during the CAADP framework scorecard releases. And then they will now generate issues that they will use to do advocacy. So we build capacity for them to use those tools. They use those tools, they generate issues. At times, some of them are to promote or recommend or kind of commend government. I remember one time when I think it was the second BR, and the results were showing that Nigeria was not on track in terms of women economic empowerment. The women farmers said, no, we've received a lot of support from government, a lot of support from non-state actors, different groups, that they didn't capture this. And the government truly didn't capture, because they were not able to go to the field to get all those data. And that was what instigated ActionAid's involvement in data generation in some of the countries where we work, like in Nigeria. We track those indicators, we work with women farmer structures across the 36 states plus the capital, and they work with non-state actors, to generate this information, feed it to the government, which they also feed to the African Union, and then get their better scores. We also fault some things when they have You come back again, have we made any progress? If yes, where are the gaps? Or where do we do better? So those are the kind of things we try to do to make sure that these scorecards work. And on our own too, as non-state actors, we do what we call scorecarding, budget scorecarding. So the government does budgets, we monitor, we analyze the budget, we track the budget. We also scorecard the government based on their funding, agricultural funding. And then the farmers would also use that opportunity to say, you've given more resources to, for example, let's say extension, but you've also forgotten to give more resources to insurance because of the climate issues. You give us extension, climate comes, we lose our goods, we are not insured, we are back to square one. So we try to use that to balance. So we do all those things to make sure that this sends back the right signals and the farmers are empowered. Because like I said, we can write all the exams, do all the consultations, celebrate all the declarations. If it is not making impact, it's a waste of time. But so far, we're getting there. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. And I think you leave us at a very good point by highlighting the unique role that demographics at the ground level have in terms of holding governments accountable. How do we support them? What is their role in terms of data collection? And that's something that we'll explore a bit further. But now going to you, Honorable Lisuba, we know the unique insight that parliamentarians bring in terms of the best ways to reach the stakeholders, and particularly those that are in rural and farming communities, and the particular target of our conversation today, which is small-scale women farmers. So, recognizing the oversight role that parliamentarians have when it comes to agricultural policies, when it comes to the budget formulation and review process, my question for you, first and foremost, is what role does gender-responsive budgeting play at parliamentary level in terms of improving a country's performance within the CAADP framework? And if you could also go a step further and particularly tell us how we can strengthen agricultural committees to be more gender-centered, right? I hope I'm framing that right and that you get the drift.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I think maybe a good place to start to answer your question is to do with fundamentally what is the role of parliamentarians, because you ask about the role of gender-responsive budgeting, but that looks or can look very different in different countries. One thing, though, that is clear is that there are 4 core functions that parliamentarians play: legislating, budgeting, oversight, and representation. Why do I mention these? It's because we need to consider them as a whole to really understand where parliamentarians stand in terms of gender-responsive budgeting. What is gender-responsive budgeting? Well, it starts with understanding the differentiated needs of men, women, girls, and boys. It then is about integrating this understanding through all stages of the budgeting cycle. Then about ensuring equity and gender sensitivity in allocated and disbursed expenditure, about monitoring the long-term cumulative impact of this expenditure, and finally, ultimately seeking to ensure outcomes that effectively address the differentiated needs and priorities. It seems straightforward when you say it like this, but what does it look like in practice for a parliamentarian? So we of course have specific laws, specific policies, even institutions that address gender-related issues. In Congo, for instance, we have a ministry for the promotion of women and the integration of women in development. That is the name of the ministry. So it's a whole institution that is dedicated to that. Within that context, we also have different laws and structures that are put in place to address some of the constraints that Simeon was talking about. So issues like access to certain resources when it comes to land, capital, finances, also questions of education and training, because I was very embarrassed not too long ago when somebody asked me, so if you have to build 20 restrooms in a school, how many do you build for boys? How many do you build for girls? In my mind, it was 10-10, 50-50, right? And that's, as most of you know, not the answer, not the case. And these are some of the gaps in our understanding that also make these questions, when you're talking about gender-responsive budgeting, a lot more challenging to address. There's another point which speaks to also the complexity of addressing these issues as a parliamentarian. You have these indirect fiscal pressures. There are many countries, not just in Africa, but around the world, that still apply VAT to things like sanitary pads, which clearly discriminate disproportionately women and girls. But this is something, again, that we keep seeing in our budgets, because budgets also set the fiscal policies. And perhaps the last thing that, example I would use to highlight this complexity speaks to something that's very rife in our country. There is a situation because our family code, which regulates, I think most countries have something similar, regulates relations within household, between countries, between families, within families, etc. Things like marriages, successions, etc. And there's a reality in there where if the couple is not civilly married, so only customarily married, the widow, if her husband dies, essentially has little to no rights to the common property that they owned. And so we've seen many examples in our country of women being completely dispossessed, literally kicked out of their homes because they were not civilly married to someone that they would have spent maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years with. And these are some of the realities. So as a parliamentarian, we have to analyze all these things. We have to look beyond the simple numbers of the budget, is where I'm going with this, and look more broadly at the situation. Because ultimately, even if we're talking about gender-responsive budgeting, this is a sociological, or these are sociological realities that we need to address, not just numbers. So that was an important point. So in this respect, I would say that the role that parliamentarians play is to fully understand this complexity, is to understand also what impact do the policies that are being implemented have, positively or negatively within that. And one of the key challenges we have in this context, Wanjiku, and this is also why I would bounce to answer the second part of your question, how do you strengthen parliamentary committees to do this? Understanding this complexity, or let's say dissecting this complexity, requires a significant level of information, significant level of awareness, because we need to understand these issues. I think, most people like me would think, oh, bathrooms in a school, 50-50. But it's more complex than that. So there needs to be work in terms of raising this kind of awareness. And then there's obviously something that Simeon raised, which is the question of data and analytical tools. It would be fantastic if it was, very easily we could get this disaggregated data, or we could find ways to collect disaggregated data. But we all know the state of data collection and data systems, statistical systems within our countries. This is very difficult to do. And without this level, this quality of data, it is then very difficult to have substantive analyses that allow for us to break down this complexity and ensure that whatever intervention, whether it be at the budgetary level, at the legislative level, or even at the oversight level, that we as parliamentarians want to bring to ensure that it is pertinent to the problems we're facing. So I've maybe gone a little bit roundabout, but the essence of my answer is that yes, parliamentarians have a role. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, as parliamentarians, we created the African Food Systems Parliamentary Network, and why we've been campaigning so hard to ensure that parliamentarians are officially recognized within CAADP. Because we've recognized that in terms of those four functions that I described, the role of parliamentarians is actually critical when it comes to policy formulation, adequate resourcing of these policies, policy implementation, the oversight, and therefore the appraisal of the impact of these policies. And this is where accountability comes from, of course. So in this regard, parliamentarians, that is the key role that they play. But I wanted to go a step further to talk about the realities and the complexity that, using those four functions or applying these four functions in practice entails. And so, not to land on a problem, again, what is required, what kind of support is required to empower not just the agricultural committees, but also all the other committees, because as we know, gender responsive budgeting doesn't necessarily just look at one sector, it can look at a variety of sectors or the budget as a whole. And in this respect, it's important to empower multiple committees. It's important to create conversations between these committees in order for, again, that complexity to be properly understood and properly addressed. And of course, on a much more practical and pragmatic level, it's about the data, the quality of that data, and then the ability to actually analyze that data to make pertinent choices or pertinent changes to the policies and budgets that we ultimately have. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lisuba. I think we can give him a better clap than that. Thank you. So thank you, Honorable Lisuba. And actually, you did kind of take us through a masterclass in GRB. But I'll just highlight really quickly some of the important areas that Honorable Lisuba has highlighted. So you bring up a very important point, which is the understanding of the difference between equity and equality. And basically, trying to make sure that as we are determining gender responsive approaches and then budgeting for them, to understand that different groups are not the same and their needs are they are varied, right? And so their experience within the sector is determined by these differences amongst, yes, because women are not monolithic, right? Something else that you also bring up, which is intersectionality, which breaking that down further basically means recognizing that women farmers vary in age, they vary when it comes to their ethnicity, they vary when it comes to their literature levels. And all of these are things that need to be taken into account when it comes to the gender responsive budgeting process. And then something else which is really, really important, which I think if we take nothing else home, we must underscore this, is making sure that we carry on gender responsive budgeting through an evidence-based approach. And I guess that's basically opening the floor to the rest of us as stakeholders to ask ourselves in our different constituencies, what is our role in making sure that parliamentarians and policymakers have the necessary evidence to be able to carry on gender responsive budgeting? I see you took your mic back. Did you want to add something?
It looks like you're going to ask me another question, so I was
okay.
preparing.
No, now that you took it, I will go ahead and ask you that question. There is also a breakdown, and just really quickly, Honorable Lisuba, in less than maybe a minute or two, there's a breakdown between continental policy and national level policy, right? So what that basically means is some of the aspects and approaches that CAADP envisions, for example, this third iteration, which is very, very progressive and advanced from a gender response perspective as compared to the previous iterations. One of the things that we worry about is that there may be a breakdown when it comes to having policies at national level that reflect that vision at continental level. So as parliamentarians, what is your role or what can you do to help interpret this to policymakers at the country level and ensure that there is engagement support as well as harmonization between the policies and the laws that are formulated there with what is envisioned at the continental level in this new framework?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Wanjiku. So we know that the policies adopted at continental level have a certain normative dimension to them. And when we attempt to translate those to national levels, we are then faced with the specificities, the idiosyncrasies of the countries. So that's one big difficulty. It's how do we go from this is how things ought to be to how do we transform this reality into the reality we want. In this respect, I would say that I've already talked about the role of parliamentarians and how it can be quite central to policy implementation. And it's not just a sort of one-time or one-shot type of thing. It's actually something that needs to be done consistently. one of the challenges that we recognize with CAADP in previous iterations is that maybe for the first few years, governments would follow and budgets would follow the national agricultural investment plans in the way that they were formulated. But very quickly, with realities, with emerging priorities, with maybe sometimes changes of governments or changes of ministers, those priorities would get diluted. People, new priorities would come about. And we would essentially veer away from the initial plan. So there is a sense in which there needs to be consistency also, not just the ability to translate relative to the realities of a country, but also consistency through time in order for that implementation to be accurate. And I would say, I would add two more things. The first thing that I believe should be recognized and is very valuable with this iteration of CAADP is that it provides the basis for speaking a common language. I think my sister Constance raised something like this, and that is something that is vital because as we know for a very long time, different stakeholders, it's not just governments. I think the same could be said sometimes about the NSA community, same could be said about the development partner community. We operate in silos. Everybody has their own agenda, everybody is looking at the situation from their lens, and oftentimes there's insufficient communication, insufficient co-creation and coordination between those different initiatives. And that harms us, particularly in a context where resources are scarce and there are many other priorities that are competing with these. So the ability to speak a common language, which I believe is provided with this agri-food systems approach, is something that is gonna, I believe, allow us to develop this common language so that we can all speak together. And this is also one of the reasons why I'm very grateful to be sat next to Constance, because the CAADP Non-State Actors Group has been one that we've been engaging with from the beginning of the creation of the AFSPAN, our network. And it's really also opened up perspectives for us because it's shown us a side that is part of our job, but that we saw from a different perspective. What do I mean by that? We talked about the 4 functions, and one of them is representation. Representation, yes, we're elected within constituencies, and our role is to represent those constituencies. But what does that mean? Is that we have to listen to what is happening in our constituencies and bring it up to these different levels, integrate it in the way we look at laws, in the way we look at budgets and the rest. And I think that sometimes we fail to come full circle with that. So sometimes we think, okay, this is what's happening there, but now I need to go to the continental level to get a different level of information. Whereas what the NSA group has allowed us to do is really understand this is how the farmers' organizations, producers, cooperatives, etc., are looking at these continental frameworks. And this is how they see those things can be fixed, some of the challenges can be fixed, or some of the opportunities can be seized at the national level. And that is really instructive for us in terms of that. So speaking that common language, I think, is vital. And I think that's already a lot, way past 2 minutes. So yeah, thank you, Constance.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Lisuba. So we'll just hear from Mrs. Afan really quickly, and picking it up from some of the points that the Honorable and Constance have spoken about. We all know the role that women's rights organizations play at the community level, especially in the agricultural sector, noting their role as essentially fast responders, data collectors, the bridge between national and subnational policies with the grassroots, etc., etc. So one of the questions that I'd like to have you respond to is what opportunities exist to ensure we leverage these women's rights organizations, especially to increase the participation of rural women in continental policy even. And I'm not sure if that's ambitious because we already have a challenge getting them to engage in national policy. But how do we jump the gun and have them go as far as continental policy?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mrs. Mary Afan. I'm the immediate past president of Small Scale Women Farmers Organization in Nigeria and a member of African Kilimanjaro Women Farmers Forum. It's a platform across all the African continent when we came together in 2016 to climb Mountain Kilimanjaro to demand for women's land rights. That informed us for the formulation of this regional and continental platform where we engage together to discuss issues that affect us as small-scale women farmers. In 2016, our major target was access to land and land control. And I think I have about 2 women that climbed the mountain here. I was one of the climbers. Yes. And since then, we've actually been engaging from our country level, regional level, and even at the subnational. It may interest you to know that when you begin to talk about continental level policy formulation, you will hear smallholder women talking about Malabo Declaration, Maputo Declaration. And this was because we've gotten the support and the training capacity building from Action Aid, Oxfam, for us to have spaces like this to engage, to understand the processes. Now, for us to understand these processes, we also need to know what the government is actually planning for us. And that is why we came to understand that, the African government have agreed that 10% of the total budget of every government should go to the agri sector. Okay, if we go back to our continental level, we now begin to engage with our government. Are you aware, as a member of the African government, that 10% of your total budget should go to the agri sector? And through the support of the non-state actor, they're able to help us analyze the budget. And we know every year which country allocate what percent to the agri sector. Okay, we move a step further to say, okay, if this percentage, if my country is contributing 2%, how many percent is assessed by smallholder women farmers? And this has helped us across our continent to even formulate budget committees, whereby we have support of stakeholders to analyze the budget, give us as a committee, we look at it and we use it as an advocacy tool to advocate even right to our community level, at the local government level, at the grassroots level. Tell us how many percentage have you allocated to smallholder women farmers, especially in the agri sector. And this has actually helped us to even inform government to allow us a space whenever they are making such policies for us to be able to contribute, to tell them, this is what we want. If you are talking of increased technology in the agri sector, and you said you want to procure tractors, it's not friendly for me. You have to make sure that you include gender-friendly equipment, give me power tillers, give me hand planters that I can use as a smallholder woman farmer to increase my production. But when you procure tractor, I cannot ride a tractor. And my land is so small that the tractor man will say, no, madam, your land is small, I cannot come and plow your land. But with my power tiller, I'll be able to till my land and plant it very effectively. And this has, helped us to engage with government to get data from the grassroots. If you said you have allocated this to the women, we'll be able to get the data, because with the development of the VAB kit that was developed by Oxfam and Action Aid, we've been engaging with this VAB kit right from our community. And this result is fitted into the BR report. When they come to present the result of the BR report, we are there to listen. Any information that actually is there and we didn't see it, we will question it. We didn't see this on ground. And it has made us to actually own this report whenever it is presented. And we also use the same report to send feedbacks to our people of what the government intends to do. And despite the fact that the space is not there much, but we are pushing forward through our platform by having access to platforms like this to be able to speak and contribute into this document that is being developed. The CAADP framework, just like Constance said, is for 3 years. If it's not working, why not come to us? We'll tell you better how it will work. Because this document is meant for us farmers to be able to produce food to feed the African continent. We understand how to do it better. let's sit on the round table and discuss how we can do this better for us to be able to achieve results. And I'm quite sure this third phase will continue to push forward to make sure that our issues are captured inside, and also we will also be able to also get the data that will be fitted into the report that will be presented anytime there is an opportunity to present such information at either the national or subnational level. Thank you.
Can we clap for Mrs. Afan again? Yeah, so I think Mrs. Afan raises a very important point, which is basically how we transition our thinking in terms of approaches. How do we transition from thinking about response to going towards transformation, which basically means not just asking ourselves, what do women farmers need? What do women agripreneurs need? What do the youth need? But asking the question of how do they need it, right? So they need access to productive resources, for example. But how do we tailor these productive resources to then meet their diversified needs? I also want to highlight something that you also mentioned there, which is basically the segmentation approach, right? And I know there's, for the technical specialists and policymakers in the room, there's an approach that Dalberg has been using over the last couple of years, which is called the segmentation model. They basically use it when it comes to finances, looking at the patterns of women farmers when it comes to their borrowing and their saving, to understand, how do they gravitate towards, new models in the financial market? Are they aversive to them, etc., and then making sure that they tailor-make packages that suit the specific needs from a financial lens, and that is something that Mrs. Afan speaks to. I think in the interest of time, I will ask that if we have questions for the panelists, we note them down, and then we transition to the next panel discussion, and then we will take the questions as a whole. But I see that we have some indication that we have about maybe 5 minutes to take questions. Are there any questions in the room? And when you please introduce yourself, let us know what your question is, and then let us know which panelist it's going out to.
Thank you. I'm called David Bazwane. I'm the program manager for Trademark Africa for the Uganda and South Sudan country program. Trademark is an aid for trade agency, and our focus is to promote inclusivity. For us, we don't call them women, but we call them traditionally marginalized groups, of which women fall. My question goes to Honorable Isoba, as a parliamentarian. Out of a scale of 1 to 10, or 0 to 10, where 10 is most, has it been easier for you to implement this gender responsive budgeting, given the mindset of we Africans being patrilineal? What have you found? What have been your challenges mainly? That's what I want to know. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Osman.
Ok, bonjour tout le monde. Je ne sais pas si la traduction marche. Ok, je voudrais féliciter les panélistes. Je pense que la question du genre, c'est une question assez complexe, avec des défis immenses. Et je pense que dans presque tous les pays africains, la question des inégalités de genre, c'est une question réelle, c'est une problématique difficile, justement, et c'est une problématique aussi pertinente dans tous les pays. Et je voulais juste m'adresser d'abord à l'honorable Lissouba. Je pense que c'est important justement que les parlementaires puissent véritablement s'impliquer. Et ma question pour moi, c'est vrai qu'il y a déjà un réseau de parlementaires qui existe, mais comment justement les parlementaires à travers tout le continent pourraient constituer une force qui va suffisamment peser sur les prises de décision, parce que c'est de ça qu'il s'agit. On est tous conscients que véritablement il y a des défis, mais très souvent, c'est comment influencer, comment peser, comment faire en sorte que ce qui devrait être fait soit contraignant afin qu'on puisse avoir véritablement des résultats. Est-ce que véritablement les partenaires africains pourraient véritablement constituer cette barrière pour nous permettre véritablement de progresser, surtout en matière de budgétisation sensible aux gens? Et je voudrais aussi m'adresser à la dame. C'est important parce que je pense qu'on ne peut pas régler cette question sans une forte implication des femmes. Il faut que les femmes s'impliquent. Et quand on dit implication aussi, c'est aussi du point de vue depuis la base jusqu'au niveau de l'élite féminine. C'est important que le combat soit porté donc depuis la base. Et de ce point de vue, il y a un défi en termes de culture de genre, même et ça c'est à tous les niveaux, même au niveau des techniciens, c'est comment véritablement, déjà en termes d'accès à l'information, parce qu'il faut que les femmes déjà sachent qu'il y a quelque chose qui existe, il y a une politique qui existe qu'on appelle CAADP, et ça c'est pas évident aussi. Il y a une élite qui est très informée, mais c'est pas évident. Si on va véritablement en profondeur, c'est comment justement depuis la base, comment constituer cette force pour justement influencer efficacement, donc pour que non seulement au niveau supra-africain, mais aussi au niveau des pays, que les politiques sectorielles qui sont élaborées, implémentées au niveau des pays puissent véritablement être suffisamment sensibles aux questions du genre. Je vous remercie. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, yes, Osman, we have, I think, allow for us to respond to the first two questions, and then just take one more question, right? And then if we have time at the end, we'll take another one, please, in the interest of time. So I will ask Honorable Lisuba to respond to the first question.
Thank you very much. Is this, can everyone hear me? Yep. Thank you for this question. I'll be perfectly blunt. Congo does not fully implement gender responsive budgeting to date. There are, let's say, there is a degree of gender sensitivity. Of course, the fact that we have a ministry which is dedicated to women's issue allows us to have specific investments for women, for the promotion of women and their integration. But to say that there is today a budget-wide approach to gender budgeting is not the case. That is the fact. There have been efforts to develop the capacity of parliamentarians in this regard, but right now we're far behind. Some of the other, there are other countries on the continent that are actually far more advanced than we are. You know, there are examples like Burkina Faso, for instance, where I believe that they have gender budgeting framework, gender responsive budgeting framework since 2016, I think. And there are a number of countries, Morocco, Ghana, Cape Verde, etc. So there is, if we're talking about Congo specifically, it's something that we actually have a lot of work to do in this respect. But it's something that is, you know, there are examples of success. It is something that does work. It is something that can be implemented. But you need a significant amount of political will to push it through. I believe we have that with the creation of our ministry, and our role as parliamentarians is to really understand what that ministry is trying to do, to amplify that, and also to bring that lens onto other sectors. And then the second critical factor is the data. The quality of the data, the availability of the data, and the capacity to analyze that data is very challenging. So I hope that answers your question. And should I also very quickly...
Yes. Could you please interpret the question, because I see some of the room does not have the interpretation gear. So if you could interpret the question and then respond to it.
Okay. I probably will go to the essence of what he said. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Faut que tu me corriges si je me trompe. But what I understood, the question is, how do we make some of these policies and recommendations that we have and that emerge from this continental level, how do we make them more constraining? So ensure that actors actually follow through, not that they're just sort of recommendations that can be picked and chosen from. C'est à peu près ça, oui, l'essence de la question. So, bon, he has the translation, so I'll answer in English. I think there are two aspects that I wanted to raise. One is institutional balance. Again, this is also my role, is to advocate for parliamentarians. One of the aspects that's crucial to why parliamentarians need to be in these processes is that parliamentarians are about, or the existence of the legislature is about institutional balance. Because we are the ones that monitor what the government does. We are the ones that can sanction the government if the government does not implement something. And of course, we are the ones who set the laws that are constraining on the whole of society. So I think that, if I may, this is also one of the reasons why it's important to have parliamentarians there, because it's no longer then commitments, and we know not just in Africa but elsewhere that commitments can or cannot be respected. We've seen that in many different fields. But when it comes to putting things in the law and going through the institutions of a country to ensure that these things are binding, that is where I believe part of the difference can also be made. But it's not to say that it needs to be in a very, it's not about punishing or it's not about undermining. Rather, it's about bringing balance, it's about correcting, and it's also about enriching the perspective so that corrective actions can be taken. So I think, part of what we talked about, and that's why the second aspect I wanted to raise, is about stakeholder inclusivity. It's because in order for something, we can't say something needs to be binding because that's what the law says. We can't be that rigid. Something can be binding, but we also need to understand why certain stakeholders may not be able to fulfill those commitments. And we need to together find ways, compromises if needs be, to actually bridge the gap between what is desired and what is feasible. It's negotiation. I know most of you are thinking that's politics. Yes, it is. It can be a dirty business, but ultimately that's what's needed to bridge divergent perspectives or different perspectives, different sets of interests, different sort of constraints that the different actors have, but building towards a common objective. So maybe that's how I can answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we will not be able to take on questions in this particular session, but we have a following Q&A after the next panel, and we'll try to make that a bit short so that we accommodate the rest of the floor. And so for those of you that are joining us on the hybrid platform, please note down your questions and they will be read out in the room. Allow me to thank the panelists, Constance, Honorable Lisuba, Mary Afan, thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you. Please stay in the room to be able to respond to any questions that will come up once we open the floor again. Can I ask everybody in the room to stand up? Please stand up. Please turn in from the position that you're standing. Hello? I see colleagues in the back are getting acquainted. Please keep your focus on me. I would like you to turn in 60 degrees to your right. 60 degrees to your right. We want to see which country did not have a good education system. All right? Somebody has completely turned at 360 degrees. Kenya, you're not doing well. Okay? I want you to turn at 180 degrees from where you're currently facing. I will give you the breakdown of how your countries are doing, believe me. I now want you to take a 360 degrees turn. All right, thank you very much. We will need to talk to the governments of Kenya and Tanzania after this about your education system and specifically for the millennials. So we want to move on to the next panel discussion. If we could all settle down. We want to move on to the next panel discussion, which is on measuring for gender response. That is highlighting gender indicators in the results framework for CAADP 3. And I will be joined by two very distinguished speakers. I want to welcome on stage Ms. Panduleni Ilago, who is the Senior CAADP Advisor in Agriculture Development Activities at the African Union Commission, a great supporter of gender transformation and non-state actors group as a whole. Please clap for Panduleni. I also want to welcome Nanzala Lazarus, who is a seasoned public policy and advocacy professional and currently with SDG2 Advocacy Hub as the Senior Policy Advisor. Please clap for Nanzala. Now, before we start this discussion, I just want to note a couple of things for the room in terms of the current CAADP results framework that we have. In accordance with the dashboard that the results framework has, it has 15 results areas and 24 indicators as a whole. And in terms of how many of these results areas are actually gender responsive, we have 4 of them, and one of them is food and nutrition security, economic opportunities, poverty, eradication, and shared prosperity. And another one is on expanded local agro-industry and value chain development, inclusive of women and youth. So basically what this means is on a continuum, on a gender continuum, that is one that starts on the extreme end of being gender blind, then gender aware, then we come to gender accommodative, and then finally to response and transformation. In truth, where the CAADP results framework stands is that in accordance with the current findings, some of which were presented here by Simeon, the framework is currently accommodative. So what we want to think about is how do we transition it from being gender accommodative to actually being gender responsive. All right, so I'll take my seat as we wait to hear from Panduleni. In the meantime, I want to ask everybody that's at the back and all the movement that's going on at the back to stop so that we can hear our panelists. So, Panduleni, first of all, congratulations. It's a big day for the African Union, and it's a huge milestone, and I think I speak on behalf of all the supporters and actors in the room that work closely with the directorate, that you guys have done a good job, and we are proud of you. And yes, and we would like to now begin applying pressure about the next phase, yeah? So please talk to us about what key gender interventions are aimed at in the new strategy. And at this juncture, what mechanisms is the AU laying in place to have this measured for in the results framework?
Right, thank you so much. And yes, indeed, it's a heavy load, but we still look forward to the next 10 years. Now, you have just already highlighted as to the current status in terms of the framework that talk to gender issues. Now, in the new strategy and action plan, we have 6 specific interventions. And these interventions, for one, they do carry so much of what we have already aimed to achieve. But the twist to it is about how we could do this with the view of agri-food systems that we are all talking to now. We need to make sure that women are represented in all the various pillars. Now, out of those 6, I don't want to be too much theoretical, but really, and Simeon has already talked or alluded to some of these already. We are talking about issues of inclusivity for women to access to finances, yeah, in the various levels of finances, but also considering both at national, regional, and continental level. You did mention and talked to issues of productive resources for women. Yeah, that is also another key highlight that is within the 6 specific strategic objectives for within the new framework. We also have issues that will talk to economic empowerment. Again, this is part of a strategic objective that was already in the previous. So in other words, we are carrying out so much of what was already there. Why? Because we still have a long way to go. Because if they were not yet still valid, then we would have omitted them, right? So that approach is very, very important to say we are carrying on almost all of it, but the issue here now is inclusivity and equitable. These are all, by the way, for some of you that has our strategy and action plan, they are all under strategic objective 4 of the new framework. Now, I could go on and on, but I don't want to be much more theoretical. How are we expected to monitor this, under which intervention? And for this, I think I should already say thank you to Oxfam and as well as FAO. Why? They have already moved one step further to support us and come up with a very clear gender responsive data collection on issues, on indicators that pertain to women. This is where we will be monitoring and evaluating the inclusivity of gender, right? At the African Union already, and I think some of you are already aware of this, we have already actually done the baseline, the baseline guidelines to this. During this year of 2025, up until December, what we will be doing now within that framework is defining, you mentioned about the indicators that already exist. We will be interacting with all of you, different partners and women. Like Madame said, what have we done? They know how to do it. So we will be engaging through various platforms and meetings to domesticate and also develop these key indicators that will see and ensure that women are part and parcel of the whole process. One of the key strategic objectives also, which has not done well, and we are hoping that we will look into it, is the involvement of women in decisions and policy formulations. Yeah? Very, very critical, because the women will say, yes, you have brought all this, but we are not involved. Yeah, we were not involved. This, again, is where our members of parliament at the national level come into play. And again, we applaud through the support of our dear brother Jeremy and the whole team of ASPAN, really to see that they are part and parcel of the involvement. The same route that we are doing with the parliamentarians is what we hope to achieve for the women, to be part and parcel as policies are being formulated at all levels. Yeah, so that is one key area of focus. So I think let me end there, but of course I can go on and on, but really it's all entwined in those 6 specific strategic areas, carrying on already what we have in place, but redefining them to ensure really that the presence of women is in the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you, Panduleni. So just to emphasize about 3 things that, Panduleni has said a lot, but I want to just underscore a couple of things that we might want to walk away with, which is the baseline is already complete at this juncture, but the African Union encourages us all in our different working groups and constituencies to engage them through to December of 2025 as they move on to the development of the results framework. Yes, and also that it's important that we provide them with the data that is requisite in terms of developing gender-sensitive indicators. Thank you, Panduleni. I think I might circle back to you, but just to hear from Nanzala. Nanzala, there is taking on from what Panduleni has where she's left us in terms of data collection. I want us to start by speaking about the BR process and our experience with that so far. So going back to having an inclusive policy formulation and review process, there is a mismatch between the data that countries currently have, the data collection protocol that they have at country level, and the BR data requirements when it comes to collection and reporting intervals. So what opportunities exist to leverage, grassroots movements and civil societies, and basically the entire non-state actors group what opportunities exist to leverage this, to improve that, so that we have more accuracy and alignment and harmony?
Yeah, thanks, Wanjiku, and quite a pleasure and an appreciation to Oxfam for putting this together. I think when we make references to the BR, first is to appreciate where we have come from. I remember when CAADP started in its formative years, it was more of a declaration, and then countries go back, and then we wait just to see what is happening. The BR, one thing it has done is it has managed to bring us together and help put numbers to what is happening at country level. So that's one thing to appreciate. And the African Union Commission and regional economic blocs and national governments for really attempting and trying to do that. To what you're saying about the mismatch, I think is more to the question where I think the previous speaker spoke about, and maybe the analogy of Honorable Jeremy on the toilets. It is more about, when you look at the indicators, you look at everything, the way it's trying to be done, is to bring a bit of uniformity in the whole continent. This is a continent of 1.2 going to 1.3 maybe billion people. But unlike China and India, which is one country, 54, 55 member states. So it means that you are trying to bring together data that is from not only different countries, different communities and different people. So when you bring it together and we sit in forums and we try to put it in Addis, then we have that, what we are calling mismatch. Because then the data at continental level might not do justice to the data that was collected maybe in my village in Busia, just across from here. But there are a few areas that I think, and just bringing it to the context of this discussion where we are speaking about gender, a few things that I think, having engaged in the BR process, maybe in the brief time, that we can be able to try and do. And for me, the big one is the element of localization. Because everything we do is local in terms of agriculture and specifically gender in our various rural communities. So how do we localize gender both in collection, dissemination, so that when we are collecting, we are doing it from down up. But when we have it, it goes back to these people to validate and discuss it, and then use the same data to influence policy. Because from the outward, we might see it, as Honorable Jeremy said, we have a school of 500 kids, maybe equal number in terms of girls and boys. So if you want to build toilets, then yeah, it's half-half. But when you go deeper, then yeah, you see that the metrics are quite different. You need to look at the needs. So I think that's one thing that we should be able to do. But the other one is enhancing participation at all levels. Ensuring that women, young people are quite included in that process of collecting and ensuring that this data is well validated. And that also, just being quite practical, as Panduleni said, and not being theoretical, is how much of this data that we collect and is put in BR comes back to influence our policy. And I think that's where our member states also maybe doesn't help our colleagues from the AUC, because yes, they bring this data and is well collected, member states share, but does it go back to again be able to be used in terms of the next framework or the next budgeting process, for example, so that then we are addressing gaps that have come out, because then the data goes through the whole process. But the other bit that I think can also be quite important, because data is quite time-bound. Today you might collect data here in Kampala and say the food is nice, the matoke is good, then the drought hits. It means the next season when you come back, the context is quite different. So continuous sharing of this data and contextualizing it might also take out the element of mismatch, especially when it goes to gender, because then they are quite dynamics and moving dynamics, especially in this era of the climate crisis. So I think that's, if I were to end it there, is something that is quite relevant in ensuring that we don't see this mismatch coming up and again.
Thank you so much. And I think I want to draw on two things that you said, and Panduleni, I will come back to you in terms of the rules of thumb that perhaps you could share with the room in terms of developing shadow reports that are actually useful and functional and complement, the African Union in terms of recommendations. Perhaps you can just think through what those could be. But before we come to that, I want to go to where you left it, Nanzala, which is, I think, something that is conspicuously ignored, but growing rather fast, and something that the continent will have to grapple with in coming days, which is the climate crisis. And the nexus between the evolving crisis, the agricultural sector, and exacerbating already existing gender issues, right? So can you please just point out for colleagues in the room, what is the correlation between the climate crisis and gender response in agriculture, really briefly? And then, because the AU is sitting next to you, what should the AU and partners be factoring in to adequately intervene, then measure for that particular challenge posed by the climate crisis, and particularly speaking to African women in agriculture? I know it's quite loaded.
Yeah, it's quite loaded, but in the context of time, I think is simply summarizing that in the context, from where I see it, is the issue of vulnerability. I think that's the biggest correlation. When you look at, when you try and look at the elements of gender, be it women, young people, marginalized groups, and you look at the climate crisis, is that the climate crisis is exposing the vulnerabilities that sit. It's the biggest pandemic maybe that we have had for quite some time, unlike, let's say, COVID, which came in a very short time, if you have to look at it that way. And therefore, it means that when we are looking at the various stakeholders working in this area, I think I'm from the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, and one of the things we did over the past few years has been trying to produce some report we call in consensus with the smallholder producers. And the element was to go sit with women farmers, rural folks, have a discussion and see what is it that you want to do. And there were two things that came out, and I think they're quite relevant in the climate crisis. And one of it is that when the climate crisis hits, everybody's impacted differently. And therefore, when you look at the women in agriculture, one of the needs that is big is investing on the farm, where the food is produced, where the things are. Because when you look at it that way, then you're looking at so many things. For example, the food that is produced, producing alone only is not what is needed. How do you even move that food to the markets, for example? And that's key. We know of areas from my country where I come from where you have a very good road network, but when it rains, just a stretch of maybe 2 or 3 kilometers, then all the food cannot move out of those farms and everything is destroyed. So I think being aware of that is quite important. And the other bit is the element of adaptation. And I think in the area of climate crisis, I think, and especially for the African continent, that has been a priority. And folks here who are maybe in the climate space know that better. And investing resources in that area, ensuring that communities can better adapt and build their resilience going forward. I know that might sound and border a bit on the element of it being theoretical, but it's quite practical. Because I think as human beings, one of the things we are best known for is continually adapting. If the 2 doors were closed, I think our heads will be thinking, how do we get out of this room? And that's an element of not only being resilient, but trying to adapt. So I think in the context of time, those are the 2 things I think that are quite relevant.
Thank you. Thank you, Nanzala. Can we clap for Nanzala? Now, Panduleni, if you could going back to shadow reporting, just a couple of rules of thumb, since we are discussing the BR and how to improve the quality of data that we have and the recommendations that we are giving to governments. So,
yeah. What happened there? Okay, it wasn't me. Yeah, I think the issue of data is a critical one. We need uniformed data systems across the continent. But what we need to recognize is not everything fits all. Yeah? Where possible, we need to make sure that indicators are tracked across the board. But we should also take into account specific countries that are unique in their particular way. Just now we were talking about climate change. And as far as things are concerned, countries such as those in, for example, Southern Africa, are so much hit on cyclones, etc., etc. So those countries have to be also quite specific in their unique way in terms of data that is to be collected and during which season those data need to be collected. So that is what we are trying to do in the new phase to ensure that while as we have the overarching indicators, we will also be able to have another layer where we have specific, unique to specific countries where issues of cyclones, floods, and drought do affect gender responsive. So that is the shadow that we have discussed, and that is the approach that we will have within the different layers of the research framework. Okay? I think that's actually the most specific to say. We will have the overarching, but another layer that will be specific to the uniqueness of a particular area, a region, or a country. But then again, to talk to that, we do need the support of our partners. Yeah? Because in order to have this, there is a lack of capacity that is required at the member state level, for the farmers, for the women, youth, and all the marginalized to be able to support us in collect this information. It is one thing for this data to be collected by, the government officials, but there are specific ones of which only the farmer would know better. And now, the actors such as Oxfam that works at the national level, we will need your support as AU to support us in collecting those information. But then again, that is also still going to be linked to the lack of robust monitoring and evaluation systems that do not exist in our countries. Even where they exist, they are not automatically linked to the national statistical system where data is automatically collected. Again, this requires capacity, human resources, and even financial resources. It brings us to the issue of resource mobilization that is required, of which the actors here, such as yourself, still making reference to Oxfam because this side event is organized by yourselves, but of course we have many, many other players in the room, even the NASDAQ actors, I see them in the midst here, will be able to support us to collect that information. So in the overarching way, that is really the shadow that we are undertaking in the next level as we come to refine our indicators at the national level. Again, thank you for the great work because you have already started in some certain degrees to support us in this regard.
Thank you, Panduleni. I just want to underscore two things that you said that were, really beneficial and things that we should take away, which is one, of course, you note the gap, the data collection gap, and the lack of robust monitoring and evaluation systems at country level, and the support that is required to be given to member states in order to improve this, which is, of course, a conspicuous issue that then affects the next level of planning. But also something else that I think we don't hear too often, which is the uniqueness of countries that have fragility, and that could be not just when it comes to the climate crisis, but also peace and security as well. And how does that then affect their agricultural performance? And what should we be measuring for in those contexts? So I guess that's food for thought. I want to take questions from the room. If you have questions, I see Mrs. Afan's hand. Anybody else? All right. Yes, right before you go, do we have questions from the hybrid participants? All right, so we'll take those two questions.
Thank you very much, our panelists. My question is to Nanzala. You actually touched something that made change. How do we have access to sharing our experience as smallholder farmers in the field, what we pass through with climate change, and things we have identified that could be the best way, to solve those issues? Because climate change is something that has come to affect us, especially we smallholder women farmers. And sometimes we lack the information and we lack the opportunity or the space to share our experience. The government sometimes impose some policies on us that we must actually do. Like if we ask them, okay, we don't want chemical fertilizer now and pesticide, can you empower us to, to go into agroecology by using, organic manure to produce our food, which is more sustainable to us and it helps us to heal the land. But sometimes these issues are not actually being captured. And we are facing a lot of, like last year, I lost my 2 hectares of land. I didn't have information that the rain was going to finish in time. And before my crop could mature, the rain has gone. And I lack such information. How do we have such page? And again, most of our women in Nigeria, if we produce beans using pesticide and chemicals, by the time we want to export these crops, they said too much chemical residues. And where these chemicals are coming from are the ones that are rejecting what we are producing. How do we balance this up? We are facing it in our communities. Thank you very much.
Can I ask the previous panel?
Yes. Who is your question for?
Honorable Jeremy.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you. My name is Bavani Christoph. I work for Action Tanzania as the country director. So I wanted to ask the previous panel, so Honorable General B, so thank you very much for very good presentation there. But let me just ask this, because ever since I was a very little kid in secondary schools, one of the factors that we used to answer any questions is lack of knowledge and capacity. That's why we are not moving. And to date, more than 30 years, we still have the same issues, that policies are not being implemented, policies are not in our government because of knowledge and capacity. Most of our leaders have been attending school. We have very good educated politicians, PhD masters. They've been attending these summits. They attend in many of our advocacy engagements. We do a lot of research, we share a lot of information. My question is, apart from knowledge and capacity, do we have any structural issue within our governance systems that may be a problem that complicate power relationship within our government? That's why things are not moving. So looking at parliament, you have different committees. Are these committees integrated well? When you have a committee in agriculture that is talking about agriculture investment, do you have the same, are these integrated with that committee of budget and finance and budget committee? Ministries, are they integrated? Parliament, the main government, do we have how the power is being shared among pillars of democracy? So do we have any structural issue in Africa that is making us not to progress even when we discuss things and agree in meetings and have recommendations? Yet there could be some issues within the government that is stopping things to be progressive. So that was my question to Honorable Gentleman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francis. Okay. All right. So Nanzala, I think you can respond to the first question.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think your question, in the context of time, I'll summarize in 2 parts. Number one is the response measures that we are having. Are they speaking in the local context? And the other bit is the element of early warning, how that is, and both focuses on information, how it flows. I believe everything has to be localized for us to respond to climate. I know a lot of the climate discussion has been quite global with the COPs and global forums, but I think it's more of our member states localizing everything. Even the rain patterns in a 2-kilometer radius location will be totally different. So how does that information get to the farmers, for example? But it also goes to something that is quite fundamental, which is about the issue of access and accountability. Me as a farmer, or you as a farmer, when you are losing your 2 acres, I think our governments have to be accountable. How do we ensure that then either we are compensating our farmers, I know there have been discussions of insurances and all that, or we are ensuring that If there is that loss, then I have some sort of remedy. I think I agree with you. In many communities across our continent, that is not happening. And I might not have the answer practically to respond to that, but it's something that I can ask for. I think in the new strategic framework, there is an element of mentioning about climate. I don't think it has been, and maybe it can be addressed at that continental level. But when these things are being domesticated, I'm looking at Honorable Jeremy, when it comes to our parliament, is ensuring that then the local legislation is able to address that. It can only be localized for it to be better addressed.
Thank you, Honorable Lisuba. Please respond in a minute or so.
You forget I'm a politician, when Jacob. Thank you, Pavan, for that question. I think it's a very pertinent question. I hope I didn't suggest that the only problem was knowledge and capacity, because clearly not. And you're right, there are other real factors that are preventing progress. This is not just true of this sector, but in many respects, there is a sense in which we know what needs to be done, and yet we've been having seemingly the same conversations for a very long time. Where does it stick? I can raise a number of things. There are a number of things that were raised already. The lack of inclusivity, that is a big problem. The fact that also situations evolve. I mean, CAADP in 2003 is not the CAADP we're voting on now. You know, there's our knowledge, our understanding of the problem has also evolved. But there are other real problems that speak to who we are and the reality of who we are, how we function, etc. Political will is not always what it needs to be. So yes, we'll pay lip service to certain things in forums like these. When it comes to our national context, maybe it's not, I'm not necessarily suggesting there's a morality question here, but it's more to do with, you come back to your national context, you have conflicting interests to deal with, you have political imperatives to deal with, you have limited resources, and all of that means that you will have to make choices, and unfortunately, too often, agriculture and questions related to food and food systems are among the first ones to be sacrificed in favor of these other priorities. And I think one of the ways that I would finish this response is to say that one of the opportunities we have now is to essentially say that actually this is probably the last thing you should sacrifice, because from here we actually move into so many different priorities, can solve so many problems potentially, whether they are related to obviously food and nutrition, but also in terms of trade and economic development, in terms of environmental resilience and the rest, and so many more other topics, that this really should be the last priority to be sacrificed. And I think that's also what I meant when I talked about building that understanding and building the capacity to really see how to act within that understanding. It's because that is how we essentially bring agriculture really to the forefront of our priorities at national level. And that's how hopefully we can break the cycle of always saying the same things and being underwhelmed by the results. So maybe that's how I can answer the question. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank Honorable Lisuba for jumping in as well. I want to thank Panduleni and Nanzala for their insightful contributions. Thank you so much. And we look forward to a continued collaborative process. Please give them a round of applause as they take their seats. So allow me to ask the participants that are in the room, as our panelists take their seat, I will ask you to take to your feet. Please stand. I'll just do a really quick, yes, Henry Roberts, please stand. Yes, I will call you out by name if you're left in your seat. The reason I asked you all to stand is because there is research that has been shown that whenever people are given information and they're on their feet, it sinks in much better. Yeah? Yes, that research is not by Oxfam, so please. Yeah, so just a couple of takeaways as we wrap this up. One of the things that a lot of the panelists have all underscored is the need for intersectional planning, and especially at national level, and leveraging different technical working groups, including agricultural committees. We've also had a very strong call for evidence-based approaches, so basically supporting the African Union and governments with data collection through different constituencies. We've also had the call to respond to new age thematic challenges, such as the thematic crisis, and to make sure that this is accounted for in the results framework. And we've also had the call to listen and understand that member states have different needs, including fragility when it comes to peace, security, and the intersection of that with the climate crisis, and to make sure that this is accounted for as well in terms of the new results framework. I want to recognize our partners as we wrap this up for the second time, but it can never be enough because Oxfam values you very much. I want to recognize the African Union CAADP. I want to recognize the African Food Systems Parliamentary Network. I want to recognize Action Aid International, ACIWOF, SOFAN, who are partners of Oxfam in Nigeria, the African Women's Development and Communication Network, FEMNET, who are our partners in absentia as well. And more broadly, I want to recognize the CAADP Non-State Actors Coalition, in which Oxfam sits. And let me wrap this up by saying we look forward to seeing you all in the process and on the side of a results framework that is aligned to the commitments that are anchored in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and for Women in Africa, also known as the Maputo Protocol, the Solemn Declaration, and the New Age thematic commitments that 31 AU member states have committed to in the Generation Equality Action Agenda. And with that, allow me, on behalf of the organizers, to say to you, as the people of this great nation of Uganda would say, Mwebale, Mwerava, which means thank you and have a good night.